Thank you for having me.
So where do you see this conflict as things stand at the moment? Where do you think it goes from here?
I think the main question on everybody's mind is whether Hamas, which effectively controls Gaza from within, will join in this fighting against Israel. In that case, it is very likely to expand into a much bigger operation. You might call it a conventional war, and that could last weeks and cause tremendous damage, civilian damage on both sides, and probably massive casualties, primarily in Gaza, but also among Israelis. And that is the big question on everybody's mind. So far, the fighting has been primarily limited to Israel and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Israeli leadership generally has taken the line that it holds Hamas responsible for everything that happens in Gaza, and Hamas is understood to have the capability to stop firing from Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But there is also a sort of understanding perhaps among Hamas that if Israel is fighting the Islamic Jihad, that's not necessarily bad for Hamas. As your reporter pointed out, they've lost very senior figures, and this will weaken Islamic Jihad in Gaza in general.
Interesting. So that's part of the political calculations that Hamas are making at the moment to make that decision, whether they do step in or they don't. What about the political calculations from the Israeli side? What are the kind of things that they'll be considering?
Yeah, you really can't divorce this from the fact that Israel is in the middle of an election campaign. Its fifth campaign in 3.5 years. It's a very unusual situation. The current prime minister, Yair Lapid, has only been in office for just over a month following a rotation deal with a government that was only established a year ago. And everybody from the prime minister to the head of the opposition, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is trying to assert, prove, convey to the Israeli public that his party, and these are all male leaders, are the best ones and the most capable ones of dealing with the situation, while at the same time trying to make a show of unity, because Israelis, like every country during wartime, try to display a rally around the flag effect. They don't want their leaders fighting with each other. But of course, each side wants to prove its mettle on the security issue ahead of the election campaign, and nobody wants to look soft.
Well, that's, as you point out there, that's the conventional wisdom, no doubt. People rally around the flag. That's good for electoral purposes. But there does come a point when, if conflict is too protracted, too elongated, that political capital then starts to fall. So how long this goes on, how entrenched it becomes, is also a crucial factor in that calculation.
Absolutely, and I think it very much matters to what extent there is a threat to Israeli civilians. I think the real measure is whether this, as you point out, how long it goes on, but to what extent there are extensive rocket salvos fired at the main central areas of Israel. It's sad to say, but as long as the fire is limited to the south, there's a great deal of sympathy for the residents of the south, but it probably won't change the electoral calculus. If that fire spreads regularly to the central regions, and there have been salvos already over Tel Aviv, what we call the central Gush Dan block area, and to Jerusalem this morning. If those continue, it could easily cross the line to being seen as a failure of the leadership to manage the situation effectively. And you're right, it's a very fine line, and this is certainly going to play into the elections. Having said that, if it ends quickly, and by quickly I mean within a couple of days, which is still possible, or up to a couple of weeks, I imagine that there's still a lot of time before the elections for people to get back to normal. And sadly for Israelis, there is an understanding that these escalations are, at regular intervals. They have learned to normalize them and live with them. They see them as part of life, and they don't often enough ask themselves which political party is offering a change of the overall policy. Remember that Israel has been effectively controlling everything that goes in and out of Gaza and the main crossings, with the exception of Rafah, for 15 years, since 2007. That's a policy that has led to now 5 rounds of war. So, it would be interesting to see if any party dares to raise the possibility of a fundamental change of policy. But so far, we're seeing only very cautious and general statements, mostly from the left-wing parties, that one day there should be an overall political resolution, nothing more.